Hey there, it is Mr. K. Welcome back to the next AP Lit lecture. Today we are kind of wrapping up our initial discussion about identifying and explaining the function of point of view in a narrative. This lesson specifically is going to help you examine another type of third-person point of view and apply that understanding to a short piece of fiction. So the last few lectures 8, 9, 10, it's kind of a set. So we looked at first-person point of view, the strengths, the limitations. Last lecture, we looked at third-person objective and looked at strengths and limitations, and really, strengths and limitations of third-person objective and third-person limited, which are, very, very close, right? And today we're going to talk about the omniscient, right? So today we want to understand the third-person omniscient point of view. We want to understand how third-person omniscient point of view differs from third-person objective and limited, and we want to practice a close reading of third-person omniscient text. I want to go briefly through this again, just to make sure we're clear on third person. Remember, third-person point of view is sort of the umbrella term. The overall term means that the person telling the story, the narrator, is on the outside looking in. The narrator is not a character in the story. Great. Okay. Now there are three types. Objective, so third-person objective, means the narrator does not convey the thoughts and feelings of any character and relates the events in a neutral way. And then we have third-person limited, which means that the narrator knows the thoughts of a single character. Real quick, let me pause. These two, objective and limited, they're close. Narrator doesn't convey any thoughts and feelings of any character. The strengths of that are, it can be very objective. I know that's the name of it, but it's just telling the events in a neutral, objective way. So, we would hope that a story told in the third-person objective, at least, within the confines of that story, we can trust what the narrator is telling us. Excuse me. A limitation is that it can be there can be a lack of empathy or emotion or feeling. These things that a first-person point of view offers us, right? And so then the limited point of view is like very, very close, right? The narrator knows the thoughts of a single character, and so that actually has a nice balance a lot of times, that the thoughts, the inner workings of a single character, and so you feel a lot of times very drawn to that character, like that's my person, that's my person in this story. A lot of times I find myself with that point of view really rooting for that character, right? Because they're me, I'm them, you know what I mean? And so, that is the benefits of a limited. Again, I would say the limitations of objective and limited can be very similar in that there is a distance. There is a distance between the narrator and the events taking place. Okay, omniscient today, we're going to look at, because it's sort of in its own kind of bubble in third person. The narrator is aware of every character's thoughts and feelings, every single thought and feeling of the characters. All right. So omniscient comes from two Latin words, omnis, or omnis, meaning all, and scientia, meaning knowledge. Now, Latin language scholars would probably shudder at my my pronunciation, so I do apologize. But the Latin words meaning all knowledge, right? Omniscient, all knowledge, the all-seeing eye. It sees everything that's happening in the story. So I would say a very common narrative point of view. All right, so I want to look at this excerpt. We've been, referring to this story a lot in the last lectures. So at this point, I'm going to look at the two parts of that story. If you're just kind of jumping in and you have not read that story, you will still be able to make sense of the concepts. All right, so it's not like you're out of luck. Okay, but let me read this and then talk about those kind of highlighted portions. So, The Story of an Hour by Kate Chopin. Knowing that Mrs. Mallard was afflicted by a heart trouble, great care was taken to break to her as gently as possible the news of her husband's death. It was her sister, Josephine, who told her in broken sentences, veiled hints that revealed and half concealing. Her husband's friend, Richards, was there, too, near her. It was he who had been in the newspaper office when intelligence of the railroad disaster was received, with Brentley Mallard's name leading the list of killed. He had only taken the time to assure himself of its truth by a second telegram, and had hastened to forestall any less careful, less tender friend in bearing the sad message. Okay, and so with that excerpt under our belts, look at these two underlined bits. Knowing that Mrs. Mallard was afflicted with a heart trouble, okay, and then this other character, Richards, is this kind of friend of the family. He had only taken the time to assure himself of its truth by a second telegram. Okay. If you're not familiar with this story, essentially what we're dealing with is we have this woman, Mrs. Mallard. She gets news that her husband, Brentley Mallard, has died. Right? And that news comes from Richards, this family friend. And he comes and gives her the news. And she goes into what seems to be a depressive state due to her husband's death. That makes sense, right? So what these two underlined or these two highlighted portions do, we feel or we're meant to feel a sympathy, right, for Mrs. Mallard. That's sad. We know she has a heart trouble, right? That in and of itself is a bummer, right? And now she's finding out that her husband's dead. This poor woman, right? And so it takes only a couple words into the story to start to feel a sympathy, a kind of closeness with her. And then we see that this family friend, he had taken time to assure himself of its truth. He's caring for her. He's obviously a friend of the family. He was trying to make sure that this news of the husband's death was true, and that he was the one who would give it to her, so she didn't hear from another source and fall apart. He wanted to be careful. He was trying to be careful with the news, so she didn't hear it from another source. Okay, now fast forward a bit in the story. Here's another excerpt. Now, well, hold on. I'm getting ahead of myself because this is fun for me. Okay, let me read this portion. There would be no one to live for during those coming years. She would live for herself. There would be no powerful will bending hers in that blind persistence with which men and women believe they have a right to impose a private will upon a fellow creature. A kind intention or a cruel intention made the act seem no less a crime as she looked upon it in that brief moment of illumination. Hold on a second. Mrs. Mallard, we know from the Omniscient narration, we know her inner thoughts, her inner feelings. There would be no one to live for during those years. She would live for herself. She went into this depressive state, not because she was sad of her husband's death, but because she was finally free. There would be no powerful will bending hers, right? Now, we as the readers, we have a much different, much more developed understanding of her as a person than even their close friend, family friend, Richards. He's like, no, I don't want to. I need to break the news to her very gently so she doesn't break in half. Right? She cares for Brentley Mallard. No, she does not. We know that. We know that she does not. Why? Because the omniscient narrator is like, all right, I'm going to show you some stuff. Like, I'm going to tell you everything about this, right? And then a kind intention or a cruel intention made the act seem no less a crime as she looked upon it in that brief moment of illumination. We are told explicitly that Mrs. Mallard is really examining her life, guys, maybe for the first time ever. She's finally free, and she's thinking, okay, let me look at my life. Let me take stock of what I actually have and what I'm gonna have in the future. And I'm gonna stop talking about the story here because, one, if you haven't read it, I don't want to ruin. But man, talk about an ending to a story. And two, let's stay on task with omniscient narration. The importance of an omniscient narrator. It's distant yet close. It's distant in that the narrator themselves are not in the story, but we also are given, through that omniscience, through that all-seeing eye, we experience a closeness. And it's almost like an author, using this narration can pinpoint, I want the readers to care about that person right there, that one, pick them out, and give us really development in that character, so that we are like, wow, we understand this woman, man, Miss Mallard. And at the end of the story, God, you're just like, your heart is breaking for this woman, especially the ending. You should read that story. So it builds sympathy for the protagonist. It creates, this is so important, and gosh, man, it's so, literature is just insane how powerful it is. It creates a tension between what other characters see and what we know. So now this is like a very meta idea, but we, the readers, there's now a tension between me and Richards, the family friend, because he thinks he understands this woman. He thinks he understands Mrs. Mallard. I forget her first name now. Louise? That might be the sister. He thinks he really understands her. I need to break the news to her gently, because this is going to destroy her. We know his friend more than he does. We know his friend more than he does. We know her more intimately, right? And so there's a tension now, and that creates that tension, that suspense, that intrigue of ooh, what's going to happen? Is he going to figure this out at the end? Is he going to understand that, oh, my friend Brentley Mallard was awful to his wife? He was terrible, we can assume. Right? We're watching and we're like, what is going to happen? What's going to go on? And so to wrap up, third person point of view, we have the objective, the limited, omniscient, right? Depending on the story, it covers it all, kind of. It covers distance, but there can be a sense of closeness, very aimed closeness at a certain character or characters. It can give us the thoughts and feelings of every character, or it can just lay it out sort of neutrally for us. It really gives a lot of creative freedom for the author by way of the narrator, right? And so just to kind of review even further back, right? We have first person, right? That gives us our intimacy, but also our bias, and third person has all different kind of characteristics of it, right? What it comes down to, my friends, is it matters how a story is told. It really does. It matters whether the story is first person or third person omniscient or third person limited or third person objective, because it brings into question ideas of power. Who has the power in this story? When you're reading a story like The Story of an Hour, at the end, I really actually feel like kind of powerful in that I know what happened. Like, I actually know what really happened, right? But there can also be the narrator has power, which we talked about in a previous lecture. And there are always limitations, which are important for us to notice and to question, which takes me to the third and final point. It matters how a story is told, and so we need to ask questions. We really need to ask ourselves what point of view is being projected here, and what is the function of that? You know, what is the function of this first person point of view? Oh, there's an intimacy. Why am I supposed to feel a closeness to that character? That's interesting. Or that causes me to feel such and such. Or ask questions like, okay, this is a third person omniscient. Now, what does that actually do for me? Oh, I understand Mrs. Mallard more than even anyone in her life. She's misunderstood. No one really knows her, truly knows her, but I do. Um, Questions of power, questions of what limitations are there, and questions themselves. That's why it matters how a story is told. All right. So today's goals, just to review them one last time, we wanted to understand third person omniscient. So ask yourself in your head right now, do I understand third person omniscient? Right? I hope so. Do you understand how third person omniscient point of view differs from third person objective and limited? I will say, even as I'm saying that and I'm teaching, it makes sense in my head, but sometimes I don't know if the way I'm describing it is making sense. So review those ideas if you're a bit shaky on those, and obviously email me if you have questions. And we wanted to practice a close reading of third person omniscient. All right, my friends, I hope this was helpful. Sorry, not sorry. I got a little worked up about how cool the story was, but that's what happens. So I will see you next time. Thanks.